Doctor, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. I know this disease is something that's personal to you. You actually saw this younger. Your grandmother had Alzheimer's. She moves into your house. Your family becomes caregivers. It's a familiar story for so many people.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for covering this story. It's so important. I know that there's a lot on people's minds these days with COVID, and we have a lot of challenges. But Alzheimer's hasn't gone away. And in fact, Alzheimer patients are even more sensitive, vulnerable to COVID, or have really been affected by the pandemic. So the good news is that we're moving forward with research. And as you said, many people in the Alzheimer who work as researchers in Alzheimer's have had a personal experience. I mean, it's such a common problem. So almost every family has had some either direct or indirect contact with Alzheimer's disease in their family.
How did that shape you?
Well, I definitely made me a better doctor, for sure. So when people tell me their problems, I know what the problems are. I lived through them as a child, so I experienced them, firsthand. And so I'm very, I guess, more understanding of what they're going through and feel for them and know how hard it is. So it definitely helped there. And I think when I had to make a choice, I was interested in medicine and interested in brain diseases and neurology. I think because of my experience with my grandmother, and knowing how much more work we need to do to make a difference in Alzheimer's, I think that may really influence me.
How far have we come over the last 40 years in tackling this disease?
Well, I tell you right now, we're on the, with all the trouble going on in the world, we're really on the verge of breakthroughs in Alzheimer's. So we've come a long way. The biggest advances have been in diagnosis. So we know part of the pathology, what changes in the brain, and now we have PET scans that can see those changes safely years before memory loss, so we can tell who's at risk, who's on the way to Alzheimer's, and try to stop that. And we have prevention trials. So I think the main takeaway message for your viewers is prevention, and that's a big focus for us, is trying to catch it as early as we can and stop the process as much as we can. So we have tests for that. We have new blood tests that look very reliable, that they're not quite ready. They're in research use now, but I anticipate in the next couple of years they'll come into clinical practice, so a doctor will be able to order a blood test and see whether or not you're building up plaques in the brain just by looking at changes in the blood. That's going to be huge because it's going to be much more economical and easy to do. And then, as many of your viewers may have heard, one of the medicines we've been testing called aducanumab. It's made by a company up in Boston, up in Cambridge, Biogen, showed promising results and is now under review at the FDA. So that could be the first treatment that actually removes plaques from the brain to slow down the memory loss in people with early stages of Alzheimer's. So we'll have to wait and see what the FDA says, but that would be a major step forward if that's approved.
Let's get to the root of the problem. Is it the plaques that build up in a person's brain?
Well, the root of the problem for the majority of people is aging. That's the biggest risk factor for Alzheimer's. The two main risk factors for Alzheimer's are aging and genetics. So as we age, for some people, and the older you get, the more likely this is to occur, plaques start building up, made of amyloid protein, building up in the brain. They occur years before memory loss, so they're building up very gradually. And then at some point they trigger other changes in the brain where another protein called tau protein builds up into a tangle inside the nerve cell. And when that starts occurring, that's when the memory loss starts to kick in, because nerve cells then start to get smaller and the connections start to break down. So now that we have ways to detect, measure this process years before, that allows us to intervene. And so now we have medicine, and we're very excited. We hope a week from Monday, we're going to be doing the first infusion for a new prevention trial that actually, for people who don't have memory loss but are building up plaques, and it actually removes the plaques from the brain. so people can find out who are cognitively normal whether or not they're at risk for Alzheimer's, and then we have a treatment to try to lower the risk.
That's always the debate. Which should we get first, a cure or the treatment or preventative medicine, that kind of thing?
All of the above. No, seriously, we have to attack on all fronts. This is a multi-pronged war against Alzheimer's. There's not going to be one treatment. I think just in general, just think of cancer. We want to find out, catch cancer early, the smallest stage, the earliest stage as possible, so we can try to remove it or arrest it. And we want to do the exact same thing with Alzheimer's.
We don't grow, for lack of a better term, brain cells, really, as we're going along. Is that kind of the challenge with brain cells being killed?
Well, pretty much, the brain remodels itself with age, because we have a number of nerve cells, and then we make connections as we go through childhood. We do make a small number of nerve cells, like in the memory area. There are new nerve cells being made in one other part of the brain, but by and large, the neurons that you have, the nerve cells you have in your brain are pretty much their lifelong. Now, another very exciting opportunity is can we figure out how to turn on nerve cell growth, because there are a small number of nerve cells that regenerate, and that's actually here at Brown. We have a couple of faculty members who are working on that, have some exciting, new approaches. So that could be a treatment for Alzheimer's, is helping to regenerate nerve cells.
Obviously, funding is a big thing. Last year, I think it was almost $54 million grant was awarded. Has that been a big challenge for you to finally get that funding to attack Alzheimer's? Right,
this is huge. So we've known that Alzheimer's is a major league problem for decades, but there just hasn't been the funding that we've seen for cancer or heart disease, and we know how much progress we've made there. And then a few years ago, we came up with a national plan to fight Alzheimer's. Congress enacted this plan, and a few years after that, they started funding it. And now, with the help of the Alzheimer's Association, they've really advocated for higher levels of funding, and the budget at NIH for Alzheimer's is 5 times higher. And so we've crossed the $2 billion a year mark. Cancer is over $6 billion a year, but it's huge. It's huge, and it's going to make a big difference. We're giving incentives for scientists to go into Alzheimer's research. We've lowered the funding levels for them, and we need that. We need the most creative minds. This is a tough problem, and working together across disciplines. So yes, we are on the right track, and we do need that investment, and also on the private side, philanthropy and foundation support is extreme. This is a public-private solution. So
it's a big collaboration between a lot of different people and organizations.
Well, one thing I'm so excited about is in Rhode Island, I think we have the right size and the right community spirit to really make a difference against Alzheimer's. And so one of the trials that we're doing, a new prevention trial called the Pointer Trial, is a lifestyle intervention. So we're going to test, this is for people 60 to 79, have normal memory, but they have an increased risk for developing Alzheimer's. And we're going to test whether vigorous exercise, a healthy diet, brain training, and heart health actually lower the rate of memory loss. And this is a collaboration here. We're one of 5 sites in the U.S. doing this Pointer trial. It's a collaboration between Butler Hospital, the Miriam Hospital, and the Alzheimer's Association and the YMCA. So that's just a great example of the kind of partnerships we really need to make a difference. And I think Rhode Island is a perfect setting for that.
Did I read right, there's possibly 40 pilot programs or tests going on?
In Rhode Island?
Just across the country?
Oh, across the country there are hundreds of projects. We're doing, probably 23 studies here at our program, and I don't know the total number in Rhode Island, but that sounds about right.
I remember the last time we talked, you were looking for volunteers, 2,020 people by 2020.
Yeah.
How did that work out?
Wow, we're so excited. Everybody worked hard. You guys covered it, and we got, the media is key here, getting the word out so that people know what's available to them. Our team reached that goal, the 2020, before 2020, and now we're north of 3,000 people in the registry. So we still, I'm sending out the call again. We need all Rhode Islanders to help pitch in and join our prevention registry and find out what the options are.
What about repurposing some drugs? There's been the idea of drugs that have been effective for diabetes, HIV. You're looking at that, of possibly repurposing some of these drugs?
Absolutely. Well, the main benefit about using a drug that's already approved is that it's gone through safety testing and you have a good idea about its properties and how safe it is. That's a great opportunity. We are going to be testing soon a drug that's approved for HIV, that based on the work of John Sedevy, an aging researcher at Brown, it looks like it slows down inflammation related to aging in the brain. And so that's a pill that's already approved that millions of people have taken. We're going to be testing soon for Alzheimer's.
Let's talk about the cheek swabs for a second and how effective that could be down the road.
Yeah, so I mentioned the two main risk factors for Alzheimer's are aging and genetics. And so there are two types of genetic risk. One, you mentioned you're going to be talking to Stephen Blaze as part of this story. His family carries the uncommon form where you have a mutation that affects if you come from a family with this mutation, it's 50-50 chance that each child can inherit that from the parent who carries it. And that's very uncommon, but very important scientifically. The most common risk gene is called the ApoE4 gene, and that's something we can test with a cheek swab, and it tells whether or not you inherit one copy from each parent, whether or not you carry 0, 1, or 2 copies of the risk gene, so you can know more about what your risk is for developing Alzheimer's in the future and take steps like these prevention trials that I'm mentioning to try to lower your risk.
And the lowering the risk is the Mediterranean diet, the exercise, that
well,
all plays
one approach
into it?
is lifestyle. Listen, healthy lifestyle, there's data that shows that 35% of dementia is preventable. So there are risk factors that we can modify, and lifestyle is, if we reduce the risk of stroke and heart disease, we lower the rate of Alzheimer's disease. So that's something everyone can do as we age, because we want brain health. We want to keep our brain healthy, keep our memory alive as we age. And everyone really needs to do their part, because then there's going to be less Alzheimer's for all of us. So lifestyle is one approach. Another approach would be actually removing or blocking the brain changes that lead to the memory loss.
What about early onset Alzheimer's? We're talking about aging, yet I met somebody who was in her 30s that had early onset Alzheimer's.
Well, 30s is unusual, but it can happen. About 5% of Alzheimer cases occur before the age of 65. So the vast majority are people that are older, and especially as you go up in the 80s and 90s and so forth. Yeah, so we're doing a study called the LEAD study, and we encourage people, if they're concerned about their memory, it's for people 40 to 64. If people have an earlier age of memory loss, we're very interested in trying to understand what's different about that. Why is memory loss occurring early in those people where it usually occurs later in typical Alzheimer's disease?
Could genetics be part of that too?
Absolutely. Genetics is an important part of that.
And that's really kind of a common theme when you really think about it.
Yes. Yep. Genetics are very important, and I think some of the treatments will also will involve gene editing, where we actually understand the genetic changes. And this is the treatment I'm most excited about, because I mentioned about tau protein gets formed into these clumps called tangles, and then that actually kills nerve cells. There's a way now to modify the tau gene, where the expression of it, so that we don't form the tangles, and we give a blocker that prevents the that pathway that causes those tangles to form. We get in there early and interfere with it with a gene editing approach.
And how far away are we for something like that?
We're hope to be starting our first trials with that here in early in next year.
Talk about the AHEAD program.
Yeah. So I mentioned about prevention is really key here. And we talked about healthy lifestyle in the Pointer trial. That's really important. Another strategy, especially for people that are already building up amyloid plaques, is to actually remove the amyloid plaques. So if we can catch it early, before the tau is built up, the brain is still healthy, but the amyloid's starting to build, something's going on there, and the person's going the wrong way toward memory loss, is can we actually get in there and use a drug that binds to the plaques, breaks it up and removes it, and then keep the brain from going down that pathway. So we have a new study called the AHEAD study, and the first infusion, it's a medicine that's given intravenously. And what's new here is we're going as low as age 55, so you don't have to be at higher age for this. People have an amyloid PET scan and find out whether or not they're building up plaques, and we're treating people with early buildup called intermediate level of buildup. This is something new for this trial. We haven't done this before. And also people with higher levels. So we're really catching in the earliest stage that we can with a medicine that actually hopefully stops or slows down the process.
You've seen this. You'll have some patients that it's gradual, the memory loss, and others it's like hitting your foot on the pedal and it accelerates. Why is it just different in everybody? Why is that?
Well, everyone, unfortunately, Alzheimer's is a progressive disease once the memory loss starts occurring. And everyone progresses at their own rate. There's basically 3 different rates. There's slow, which is the most desirable over many years. There's the most typical, where there's a gradual decline over months to years, and then there's more accelerated. And it's a good question about, and that's the minority of people have a more accelerated course where there's a more rapid decline. And that's something we're trying to understand better, why, what controls, what are the factors that regulate the rate of change.
There are different forms of dementia. We just saw Tom Seaver.
Okay.
The baseball player passed away a couple days ago. He had Lewy body,
okay.
Dementia. You have Alzheimer's, you have different, they're all part of the same family? All this research that you're doing, does it all attack the same thing or is it different?
Well, the most common causes of memory loss would be Alzheimer's disease, and then actually plus vascular changes in the brain, so mini strokes or hardening of the arteries. That contributes, so that's very important. And then diseases like dementia with Lewy bodies, another one called frontotemporal dementia. Parkinson's can also be associated with dementia. So the main thing that unites those dementias is that there are neurodegenerative disorders. So there are abnormal proteins that build up in clumps, and the nerve cells get smaller, and memory loss progresses. And so understanding how these diseases relate to one another, because nerve cells are changing, and whatever we learn about Alzheimer's may apply to Parkinson's disease or dementia with Lewy bodies, so they definitely relate to one another. And our approach here, because Brown is taking a very strong interest in Alzheimer's research along with the hospitals within the system, is really Alzheimer's and neurodegeneration. So you may have heard just this week, there's a new treatment that showed benefit for ALS. And that's another neurodegenerative disorder. And that same treatment, which is a pill, which is part of it, one of them is a supplement that's already available. It's 2 drugs, is also being tested for Alzheimer's. So it may be a treatment that works for one neurodegenerative disorder to keep the neurons viable, will also work for another one. So really understanding how they relate to one another is critical. And I'm very excited that the ALS Advance is a company that was founded by 2 Brown undergrads who were working in their dorm room of how to keep neurons healthy.
Well, it's pretty good.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about concussions, because that can play a part, because we've seen athletes especially, in their 40s and 50s, completely lose their memory.
Right. So that's why it's so important to emphasize brain health. So getting knocked around too much obviously isn't good for your brain and long term as you age. Because if an athlete, if a football player, takes these high velocity hits and has a series of them, has a cumulative effect on the brain. And then remember, that person's now going to age. So maybe something happens while they're still playing, but more likely, if they're susceptible to this, there can be a degenerative brain change. So it's another form where in those patients with CTE, that's what's the brain disease of athletes, especially football players, is they build up an abnormal tau protein as well. It's a little different form of tau than in Alzheimer's, but it's a tangle, and it affects memory, it affects behavior, and unfortunately, many football players go on to have dementia. So one risk factor for Alzheimer's is head injury. So again, avoiding major head injuries is very important in preserving brain health.
Finally, just moving forward the next year or two, I know you're excited about all the trials that are going on. Where do you see us in a year or two?
Well, hopefully COVID will be in much better shape and we can go about our lives more easily, and that will make a big difference.
That's really hurt patients because of, part of it because of the isolation, right?
A number of factors there. Obviously there's fear and isolation, and if someone's prone to anxiety already, then that's going to be exacerbated and so forth. I think just participating in a trial, then venturing out and feeling comfortable doing that. I feel very appreciative that our program, and I really thank our staff and our participants in our studies. We've stayed open the whole time. We take COVID very seriously. We take all the precautions prescribed by the state and our hospital to make sure that the distancing and mask wearing and screening for illness, to make sure that people are safe. And fortunately, we've had no cases here either among patients or our staff, and so thank God for that. So that's very important, to stay active and do your part even with the pandemic, and doing it with care. So I want people to obviously be careful, but don't take advantage of these opportunities for brain health and making progress against important diseases like Alzheimer's.
We'll see the first survivor of Alzheimer's?
Well, I think, boy, there's so much going on right now that we've just talked about. We'll see what happens with aducanumab, whether or not we have our first breakthrough treatment. We definitely have breakthrough diagnostic tests. They're already here, and more are going to be coming. So in the next couple of years, I'm very optimistic about that. I think the whole practice, I think we'll be at the beginning of the modern era of the treatment of Alzheimer's. It's going to be like other major diseases. We diagnose it early. We have treatments that make a difference. We give lifestyle recommendations that make a difference in brain health, and it's going to be much more manageable.
And I'd love to tell that story.
Good. We'll keep telling it, because it's evolving, and so the role of the media, I think, is critical. So people understand it better, know what their options are, join prevention registries, and really, it's a team effort, and really do their part.